So once you start thinking about this, though, you've actually, what Rabbi Mark has described in terms of just developmental scale, and the developmental scale, incidentally, is only one of many, many variables that we use in an integral approach, but it's the one that's usually overlooked. So we tend to talk about it a lot. People think we sometimes are obsessed with it. It's just not true. But it is a very important one. And what Mark has described, I think, is very, very important because there are other things happening that, remember, you can have states. You can have gross, subtle, causal, deity, union with nature, union with God, union with formless. Those are states that can occur at any of the stages of archaic, magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, and so on. So you get a grid of however many stages of development you want, let's say 6, and then you have 4 major states here. That gives you 24 types of really profound experiences you can have. But if you see that interior light, you're going to interpret it according to the stage that you're at. You can't help it. When you're in it, and that's fine. But as soon as you come out of it, if you're at the magic stage, it's going to be magical Jesus. Jesus is here. Jesus can walk on water. Jesus turns the loaves into fish. Jesus can do this. It's a very magical Jesus. If you're myth, you're going to interpret it as an eternal lawgiver. And as a matter of fact, myth is exactly what tries to clamp down on magic, because magic is egocentric and myth is ethnocentric. If you see that light and you're rational and scientist, you might come out of it and you might try to interpret it away. Oh, it's just a little brain fizz. And if that keeps happening, though, then you might interpret it a little bit differently. Classically, for 1,000 years, the problem was if you ascribe these characteristics to the mythic God. Now, this mythic God is really conceived as a person-ish, person in a broad sense, meaning a being with intelligence. And all of a sudden you see what we call mythic rational, which is great, great minds taking these myths and trying to make them work. And the first thing a really smart mind does is notice that you can't be omnipotent, omniscient, and all good. You can be 2 of those 3, but you can't be all 3 because they're contradictory. If you know everything that's going to happen, if I know that Auschwitz is going to happen, and I'm all-powerful, and I'm all good, I'll prevent Auschwitz. But Auschwitz happened. Okay, now what do I do?
And that's
now, what happens is the mythic structure runs up against reality that it can no longer interpret. It runs up against its limits. And then you do one of 2 things, just developmentally. If you're really smart, you'll move up and write a book called Uncertainty. That's the only way you can get out of these contradictions. You have if you're not, you go this way into magic and you get New Age. And that half the audience walked out. I think they'd rather be Jerry Falwell. But you can go down and get very magical about the whole thing, which is just
that's
what
the New Age move.
Described. And some aspects of New Age have state experiences that are very real. And just like when you were talking about leaders that can have very profound religious experiences but interpret them ethnocentrically, you can have very profound spiritual experiences and interpret them egocentrically. Oh, I did this. Oh, I'm teaching myself a lesson, and so on. Now, that developmentally really is egocentric. And people will say, well, but the self creates everything. And they go, yes, but you didn't say that. You didn't say, oh, I'm making the sun rise and I'm making this happen. If you really think that everything that's arising is what you're doing, everything is what you're doing, then that's okay. But that's not what New Age does. New Age says, oh, I'm going to do this and it's going to make it happen to me, and I'm going to do this and make it happen to me. Maybe that'll work, maybe it won't. But that very much invites this egocentric, narcissistic notion. And so we all know that New Age does have a little bit more magic than it should have. Just a little bit. Along with some very real state experiences and some very subtle energy stuff that's going on.